One of the most common traps we fall into in relationships, whether romantic, platonic, or familial, is the belief that love means fixing. That if someone is hurting, lost, or emotionally unavailable, it becomes our role to rescue them, to listen, to coach, to guide, to be their emotional anchor. And while it sounds noble on the surface, underneath it lies a dangerous confusion of roles, trying to become someone's therapist when all they really need is someone who loves them without trying to change them. When we take on the role of the fixer or the emotional caretaker, we unconsciously shift the balance of the relationship. We stop being equals. Instead of showing up as a partner, we show up as a healer. Instead of asking, is this relationship nourishing me, Ingjing? We ask, how can I make them better so that this relationship finally works? That's not love, that's a project. The problem with becoming someone's therapist is twofold. First, it creates emotional dependency. The other person learns that as long as you're there to process their trauma for them, they don't have to take full ownership of it. They start outsourcing responsibility for their own healing. Second, it slowly erodes your emotional energy. You begin to absorb their emotional weight without the qualifications, boundaries, or detachment that an actual therapist is trained to uphold. You're not just giving support, you're carrying their baggage, piece by piece. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes we become the fixer because we're afraid. Afraid that if we don't make ourselves indispensable, we won't be wanted. We think, if I can be the one to change them, maybe they'll finally value me. Maybe they'll stay. But that's not partnership. It's bargaining. And it turns love into performance. In healthy relationships, mutual respect means mutual responsibility. Each person is accountable for their own healing, growth, and emotional maturity. Support is absolutely vital, but it should be reciprocal and balanced. Not one person constantly giving while the other is constantly taking. You're allowed to have needs. You're allowed to step back when someone's emotional state becomes too heavy to carry. You're allowed to say, I love you, but this is something you need to work through yourself. What often gets overlooked is that real connection doesn't come from fixing someone. It comes from seeing them as they are. When you let go of the fixer role, you stop trying to mold them into the version of themselves that you think they should be, and instead ask, can I love who they are today without needing them to change first? That shift from therapist to partner, from fixer to equal, doesn't just free you. It gives them the space to grow because they choose to, not because they're being managed. And in that space, real, authentic, lasting connection is born. When you constantly step in to fix someone, even with the best intentions, you may not realize that you're giving them permission, sometimes even encouragement, to avoid responsibility. Every time you jump in to solve their problems, soothe their emotions, or clean up their mess, you're sending a subtle but powerful message. You don't have to face this. I've got it. Over time, this dynamic reinforces passivity on their part and emotional exhaustion on yours. What feels like love or support can slowly morph into a one-sided emotional contract where you're doing all the heavy lifting. It becomes your job to manage their moods, solve their crises, and guide them through every difficulty. But when someone knows that you'll always be there to fix things, they're less motivated to grow. Why should they confront their own behavior if someone else is always there to patch up the consequences? There's a term for this in psychology, enabling. And it doesn't just apply to addiction. It applies to any situation where one person's helpful behavior removes the natural consequences another person would otherwise face. By trying to fix, we often cushion others from the discomfort that could have served as the very catalyst they need for self-awareness and change. And let's be honest, sometimes trying to fix someone is as much about us as it is about them. It can feel good to be needed. It can make us feel important, even powerful. But in the process, we might be holding someone in emotional adolescence, keeping them dependent rather than inviting them into accountability. The more we focus on solving their problems, the less time they spend developing the emotional tools to do it for themselves. This creates a loop. You fix, they avoid. You fix again, they continue to avoid. And you become resentful without realizing that you've trained them not to step up. The hard truth is people don't grow when they're comfortable. Growth is born out of tension, when life pushes you to reckon with who you've become or how your actions affect others. But if someone is never allowed to feel that friction, if someone is always bailed out, they may never have that moment of truth. And without that moment, nothing changes. It's not unkind to let someone experience the consequences of their own behavior. It's actually respectful. It means you believe in their capacity to handle life, to learn, and to grow. You're saying, I trust that you can face this. I trust that you can rise. By stepping back from the role of fixer, you stop enabling their avoidance and start encouraging their evolution. You stop being the cushion and start being the mirror. And it's in that reflection, clear, unfiltered, and sometimes uncomfortable, that real accountability begins. There's a big difference between helping someone and enabling them, though the line can often get blurry when emotions are involved. Help is rooted in empowerment. It says, I'm here beside you while you figure this out. Enabling, on the other hand, takes the weight off their shoulders and places it on yours. It quietly tells them, you don't have to figure this out. I'll do it for you. And while it may look compassionate on the surface, enabling robs people of the opportunity to grow stronger, more self-aware, and more capable. Many people believe they're being helpful when they constantly solve someone else's problems, excuse their behavior, or shield them from the consequences of their actions. But true help uplifts and strengthens. It holds space for someone's journey while also allowing them to experience the discomfort necessary for change. Enabling, though, blocks that process. It keeps people stuck in the very patterns they need to outgrow. Let's take a closer look. When someone is struggling with emotional regulation, poor decision-making, or avoidance, and you keep stepping in to manage the fallout, whether that means calming them down, fixing what they broke, or covering for their lack of follow-through, you're not actually helping. You're making sure they never have to confront the source of their behavior. And deep down, that doesn't serve either of you. You start to feel drained, overextended, and maybe even resentful. Why? Because you're constantly pouring energy into someone who isn't taking responsibility for their own healing or behavior. They continue cycling through the same issues while you keep carrying the emotional cost. It's not a partnership at that point. It's a one-way street of sacrifice. And worse, it creates an illusion for them that their behavior doesn't have real impact, that someone will always clean it up. Helping, by contrast, sounds more like this. I'm here if you want to talk about it, but it's on you to decide what you're going to do. It's setting boundaries. It's encouraging them to take action instead of making them comfortable in their dysfunction. Helping is uncomfortable sometimes. It means resisting the urge to swoop in and save, and instead allowing them to experience their own choices, their own consequences, their own growth. The shift from enabling to helping is a mindset change. It requires you to trust that people are more capable than they may be acting. It requires patience, especially when someone is struggling. And yes, it requires courage, because watching someone you care about navigate discomfort without intervening can be difficult. But it's also one of the most loving things you can do. Because when you stop enabling and start truly helping, you stop robbing people of their lessons. You stop playing the role of savior and instead become a mirror, a guide, a steady presence. And from that place, people don't just feel supported. They start to transform. Trying to fix others often has less to do with them and more to do with us. Lies. On the surface, it looks like care, compassion, or deep love. But when you peel back the layers, it's often rooted in fear. Specifically, the fear of being abandoned, rejected, or made to feel unworthy. So instead of risking loss, we overinvest. We throw ourselves into saving, changing, or managing someone else because we believe that if we can fix them, we can finally feel secure. It becomes a strategy, a coping mechanism. If they get better, if they finally open up, heal, become more stable, then maybe the relationship will feel safer. Maybe then they'll love us the way we hope to be loved. And in that hope, we override our own needs, silence our own discomfort, and push through red flags. We stay longer than we should. We give more than is healthy. Not because we're unaware, but because leaving feels more painful than staying in a dysfunctional dynamic. This fear often stems from early experiences where love had to be earned, proven, or maintained through emotional labor. If you were raised in an environment where you had to be the emotional adult, or where inconsistency and instability were normal, you may have learned that love and fixing are the same thing. That love means sacrificing yourself for someone else's healing. So when you meet someone who is emotionally unavailable or deeply wounded, that part of you kicks in. If I just try harder, they'll change. If I just love them better, they'll stay. But the truth is, fixing someone isn't a path to security. It's a delay tactic. It postpones the reality you're afraid to face, that some people are not ready to meet you where you are, and no amount of effort on your part can make them ready. What's even more heartbreaking is that in trying so hard to fix them, you often end up abandoning yourself. Your boundaries fade, your energy depletes, and you lose touch with your own emotional needs. Ironically, the more you try to fix them, the more disconnected you become from the part of yourself that actually needs healing. The part that fears being unloved unless you're useful. That's the deeper confrontation. Not with the person you're trying to fix, but with the part of yourself that believes love must be earned through emotional overfunctioning. Healing doesn't come from trying to manage someone else's growth. It comes from recognizing that your worth isn't tied to what you can fix, give, or sacrifice. The relationship that needs attention isn't just the one with them, it's the one you have with yourself. When you start to work on that, on trusting your own enoughness, on sitting with the fear of rejection without trying to outrun it, you begin to choose relationships that are based on mutual growth, not emotional rescue missions. Letting go of the fixer role isn't giving up on love. It's learning to love in a way that includes you too. You cannot grow for someone else, no matter how much you love them, how clearly you see their potential, or how desperately you want a better outcome. Growth is a personal decision. It's internal, it's voluntary, and it can't be outsourced no matter how hard you try to inspire, motivate, or push someone in the right direction. One of the most painful lessons in relationships is realizing that you can't force someone to want better for themselves. You can show them what's possible, you can lead by example, you can give them tools, but if they don't pick them up and use them, nothing changes. Growth doesn't happen because someone tells you it's time. It happens when something inside of you shifts, when you've had enough of your own patterns, when the pain of staying the same finally outweighs the discomfort of change. Often, we try to grow on someone else's behalf because we care. We want to spare them the hard parts. We want to smooth out the road, clear the obstacles, protect them from their own blind spots. We try to carry the emotional weight they refuse to face. But in doing so, we rob them of the process that would make them stronger. We take on responsibility that was never ours to begin with. This often leads to frustration, burnout, and a sense of emotional imbalance in the relationship. You're doing the emotional work for both of you. You're the one reading the books, initiating the hard conversations, regulating your reactions, and trying to create healthy space. But if the other person isn't meeting you there, if they're not reflecting, not changing, not doing their own internal work, starts to feel like dragging someone uphill while they're asleep. And here's what's worse. Trying to grow for someone else can unintentionally enable them to stay stuck. Why would they change when you're already doing all the heavy lifting? If you're always the one making progress, compromising, or healing the conflict, they never feel the urgency to look within. They become passive participants in their own development. The truth is, growth is a choice. It's often uncomfortable. It requires humility, honesty, and courage. And those are qualities no one can cultivate on your behalf. You can model growth, you can be a safe place for it, but you can't force it. If they're not ready, all your effort will only lead to resentment. If they are ready, they'll begin walking their own path, perhaps influenced by you, but driven by an inner conviction that it's time. It's not selfish to stop doing someone else's work for them. It's actually the most respectful thing you can do. For them and for yourself. You deserve relationships where growth is mutual, where accountability is shared, and where love doesn't mean carrying someone. You walk together side by side, both choosing to rise. Detachment is so often misunderstood. People hear the word and assume it means becoming cold, distant, or uncaring. But true detachment isn't about shutting down emotionally, it's about gaining clarity. It's about stepping back from someone else's chaos long enough to see what's actually yours to carry and what isn't. It's about learning the difference between support and self-sacrifice. When you're emotionally entangled with someone, especially someone who's struggling, unpredictable, or emotionally unavailable, your sense of peace becomes tied to their behavior. You start reacting instead of responding. You absorb their moods, try to fix their problems, and feel responsible for their outcomes. Your happiness becomes conditional on their growth. That's not love. That's emotional enmeshment, and it's exhausting. Detachment is the process of creating space between your identity and their choices. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop allowing their unresolved wounds to dictate your emotional well-being. You stop making excuses for their behavior. You stop shrinking yourself to maintain harmony. And most importantly, you stop trying to earn their change through your effort. When you detach, you begin to see the situation more objectively. You're no longer trapped in the emotional fog of a maybe if I do more, they'll be better. Instead, you start asking real questions. Is this healthy for me? Are my needs being met here? Am I growing in this dynamic, or am I losing myself in it? Clarity is what detachment gives you, and clarity leads to better choices. Choices rooted in self-respect instead of fear. Because when you're deeply attached in an unhealthy way, fear runs the show. Fear of abandonment, fear of conflict. Fear that if you stop trying, everything will fall apart. But here's the truth. If the only thing holding a relationship together is your constant effort, it's not a stable relationship. It's a performance. Healthy detachment invites both people to take responsibility for themselves. When you stop stepping in to fix, to rescue, or to manage, the other person is finally faced with the mirror. They see what life looks like without your buffering, without your emotional labor propping up their dysfunction. That space is where self-confrontation can happen, but only if you stop standing in the way. Letting go isn't weakness. It takes immense strength to say, I love you, but I will not abandon myself in the name of loving you. That is clarity. That is courage. And the beautiful part, when you practice healthy detachment, you don't just protect your peace. You become a more grounded, loving, and whole version of yourself. You stop trying to control outcomes and start living with integrity. From that place, your relationships, whether they continue or end, will always be aligned with truth rather than illusion. And that is where real love can begin. Sometimes the most powerful act of love isn't doing more, it's stepping back. It's allowing someone to face themselves without your constant presence softening the blow or shielding them from reality. As long as you continue to insert yourself between them and the truth of their own behavior, you become a buffer. You unintentionally delay the very transformation you're hoping for. People often don't change when everything is comfortable. They change when something hurts enough that they can no longer ignore it. But when you're always there to clean up the emotional mess, to absorb their moods, to make excuses, or to remind them of their potential, they don't feel the full weight of their actions. They don't face the discomfort of being truly alone with themselves. And sometimes that's exactly what they need. When you remove yourself from the dynamic, not in a spiteful or punishing way, but in a clear and self-respecting way, you take away the distractions. You take away the emotional cushion. And without that, they're left with themselves, their patterns, their decisions, their consequences. That space, while painful for both of you, is often the very ground where accountability begins to grow. Let's be honest, no one wants to be the catalyst for someone else's pain. You don't want to see them struggle or spiral. But it's not your job to prevent their discomfort. It's your job to recognize when your presence is preventing their growth. And when you step back, you give them the rare opportunity to confront the unfiltered reality of their lives, the silence, the emptiness, the disconnect, and begin asking the questions that actually matter. Why do I keep ending up here? What am I avoiding? What do I need to change? The key is to step back with love, not bitterness. You're not abandoning them. You're respecting both your limits and their journey. You're saying, I care enough about you to stop enabling this pattern, and I care enough about myself not to lose who I am in the process. That kind of clarity creates a shift. It may not lead to immediate transformation, but it plants a seed. And here's the thing, some people will rise in your absence. They'll feel the space you left and begin to understand what they took for granted. They may take the painful, necessary steps to face themselves and grow. Others won't. They'll continue avoiding, blaming, or staying stuck. But either way, their growth or lack of it was never yours to engineer. You are not responsible for saving people from themselves. You are responsible for showing up in integrity, knowing when your presence is a gift and when it's a crutch. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do, the most honest, loving act, is to step away and let the silence speak louder than your efforts ever could. When someone truly wants to grow, they will. You won't have to remind them over and over. You won't have to push, beg, explain, or exhaust yourself trying to make them see what's wrong. Real growth comes from within. It's self-driven, not externally imposed. And the moment someone decides they're ready, you'll know. their actions will change. Their effort will be consistent. Their awareness will deepen, because that kind of transformation doesn't need to be forced. It flows from genuine desire. One of the hardest things to accept in relationships is that no matter how much potential someone has, or how clearly you see who they could become, they still have to want it for themselves. And that's the difference between someone who says they want to change and someone who actually does it. A person who is truly ready to evolve will start doing the work with or without your involvement. You won't have to initiate every conversation, monitor their progress, or emotionally carry the weight of their healing. They'll take the reins of their own development because they've made an internal choice. This doesn't mean they become perfect overnight. Growth is still messy. There will still be missteps, but you'll see the difference in how they show up. You'll notice they start taking responsibility instead of making excuses. They begin owning their impact, apologizing when necessary, and taking concrete steps toward healthier behavior. And most importantly, they don't rely on you to lead the process. They become active participants in their own evolution. Contrast this with someone who isn't truly ready. They'll say the right things but follow through inconsistently. They'll agree to change, but only when you're upset, not when they're internally motivated. They may even mimic growth just enough to keep you around, but the substance won't be there. That's because they're trying to perform growth, not live it. And deep down, you'll feel the difference. You'll sense the emotional labor still falls on your shoulders. You'll still be the one tracking progress, initiating accountability, and holding the vision of a healthier relationship alone. Here's the truth that frees you. You don't have to chase someone into growth. If they want it, they'll meet you there. If they don't, no amount of effort on your part will make them ready. That clarity is painful, but it's also empowering. Because it allows you to stop overfunctioning in relationships. It allows you to choose partners, friends, or even family dynamics where growth is mutual, not one-sided. When you accept that people will grow only when they decide to, you reclaim your energy. You stop trying to light a fire in someone else's soul while neglecting your own. From that place of clarity, you start to invest your time, love, and effort in people who are already doing the work, not just talking about it. One of the hardest lessons in relationships is recognizing that your love, your support, your effort cannot force someone else to change or grow. No matter how deeply you care about them, how much you want them to see the value in themselves, or how many times you patiently explain what they need to do to improve, you can't make them internalize it. Change is a personal choice. It's not something you can do for someone else, no matter how much you wish you could. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop offering encouragement, advice, or emotional support. But it does mean recognizing that you can't carry the burden of someone else's growth. It's their job to walk that path, to do the internal work, to look at their flaws and their behaviors, and decide whether they're willing to change them. You can give them the tools, offer them insights, and be a sounding board, but ultimately they have to take the step for themselves. And this realization, though difficult, is freeing. It's freeing because it stops the cycle of frustration that arises when you're constantly trying to change someone else. You stop feeling like you're in a never-ending cycle of giving advice, setting boundaries, and putting in emotional labor. The truth is, you cannot make someone else see their behavior clearly, nor can you force them to act on it. Change happens when the other person is ready, and when they realize on their own that the way they've been living no longer serves them. And only then will you see real, lasting change. This is where you start to learn the power of letting go. Letting go doesn't mean abandoning the relationship. It means stepping back from the idea that you are responsible for another person's personal transformation. You no longer make it your mission to fix them or to help them see what they're doing wrong. You allow them the space to realize it for themselves. And by doing so, you create room for both of you to grow individually. You stop trying to be the catalyst for someone else's change, and in turn, you free them to make the decision to grow on their own. You stop taking on the emotional burden of their progress, and instead you focus on your own growth and well-being. It's not that you're giving up on them. It's that you're trusting them to take ownership of their own life and their own evolution. And when someone does step into their own growth from a place of personal responsibility, the change is far more powerful and sustainable. The most loving thing you can do then is stop trying to fix them. Stop believing that you can do their emotional work for them. Trust that if they truly want to change, they will. And if they're not ready yet, you can still love them. But you don't have to be the one carrying the weight of their journey. You'll both be better for it. The truth is, when you stop trying to fix someone, you allow them the opportunity to see themselves more clearly. It's like holding up a mirror, one that doesn't blur their reflection with excuses, justifications, or emotional buffers. Without your constant intervention or emotional labor, they're finally forced to confront their own behavior, their own patterns, and the consequences of their choices. And that confrontation is the first step toward change. We often try to shield people from the discomfort of their mistakes, but growth isn't comfortable. It doesn't happen in a space of emotional comfort or denial. Growth requires discomfort. It requires the feeling of being unsettled, challenged and faced with the truth of where you've been and where you need to go. And while we can't control the timing of someone's awakening, we can control whether we keep enabling their avoidance of that discomfort. By stepping back, we allow them to face the hard truths they need to face in order to move forward. When you stop fixing someone, you stop absorbing the emotional cost of their behavior. For too long, you might have been carrying the weight of their issues, trying to manage their reactions, or trying to mitigate the fallout from their poor choices. But that's not your job. You're not responsible for their emotional state, their progress, or their decisions. In trying to protect them from the consequences of their actions, you've been preventing them from learning the very lessons they need to learn. This isn't to say you should stop caring. Far from it. The reality is, true care often means giving someone the space to deal with their own emotional baggage, their own mistakes, and their own life. It's allowing them to feel the consequences of their actions, because those consequences are often the very things that spur someone into real transformation. When you stop fixing them, you stop robbing them of that opportunity. You also stop reinforcing the idea that their healing or growth is contingent on your constant presence. This is important because many people, consciously or unconsciously, rely on someone else to keep them afloat. They lean on others to give them emotional stability, to constantly remind them of their worth, or to carry them through their struggles. And as much as you might love them, you can't be that crutch. You are not responsible for someone else's healing journey. Their ability to heal lies in their own hands. When you step back and stop fixing, you make it clear that their progress is theirs to own. They can no longer rely on you to smooth over the rough edges of their growth process. They are faced with the raw, unfiltered version of their reality. And it's in that space of confrontation that they begin to find the strength to move forward on their own. It's a tough love, but it's also an empowering one. By no longer stepping in to fix, you allow them to grow stronger, more resilient, and more self-aware. And in doing so, you create the space for both of you to grow, not just in your relationship with each other, but as individuals. You stop carrying the burden of their transformation and instead give them the room to transform themselves. And that, ultimately, is the most loving thing you can do. In conclusion, the moment you stop trying to fix someone, you release both them and yourself from a cycle of emotional labor that isn't yours to carry. You stop acting as their emotional crutch, and instead you allow them the space to confront their own truths, face their own challenges, and do the necessary work to grow. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you trust them to take responsibility for their own journey and trust yourself enough to stop sacrificing your own emotional well-being in the process. True growth comes from within. It's a choice that each person must make for themselves. And when you stop enabling someone's avoidance of discomfort, you create the conditions for real transformation to occur. You no longer carry the weight of their emotional baggage. You no longer bend over backward trying to fix what they're not ready to change. Instead, you take a step back, give them the space they need, and allow them to rise to the occasion on their own terms. This is the most empowering, loving thing you can do for both of you. You'll no longer feel the weight of responsibility for their growth. You'll be free to focus on your own healing, your own boundaries, and your own well-being. And in doing so, you make room for healthier, more balanced relationships where love isn't about fixing each other, but about growing together, side by side, as equals. That's the kind of relationship where true transformation, both personal and relational, can happen. So remember, love doesn't mean fixing. It means letting go and allowing each person to become who they're meant to be.